Hi, everyone. Welcome to the weekly philosophy chat on Hello Philo. Today, we're going to be discussing the meaning of life, which is a philosophical subject with which no doubt every human has struggled, or at least considered. There doesn't seem to be much agreement on what it is or whether it even exists. But when we see meaning and when we feel meaning, somehow we just know. Our goal on Hello Philo is to make philosophy a bit more relatable by discussing and debating subjects that affect us all. I hope this conversation today encourages you, our listeners, to recognize why you think what you think and apply your own sense of critical thinking on issues you face in your own life. My name is Claire Foster, and I am so happy to be joined today by Dotan Russo.
Thank you, Claire. It's great to be here with you.
Well, it's great to have you. So, last week we talked during our episode about death. So, this week I was hoping that we could talk about life and specifically maybe dive into a few specific questions. So, is there a meaning to our lives? Something that we all think about and consider. Not sure how much progress we make. And then, if there is a meaning, does the meaning depend on the certainty of our death or demise, or are the two not related at all? And how do we know that any of what we're thinking or saying is true? So, I would love to get your thoughts. Let's jump right in. Dotan, do you believe that there is a meaning to our life?
Well, that is the $1 million question, obviously, and this is not just a question that philosophers ask themselves. Everybody asks. We all ask ourselves, and anyone can relate to this. You know, when you wake up in the morning or just before you go to sleep, and you ask yourself where this is all heading. And in fact, we as humans, we have this need for meaning. It's not enough for us just to live our lives. Even if our lives are comfortable, it's just not enough. We have this internal need for something beyond, something that would a way for us to consider our lives as meaningful. And yet, it is very challenging to first to articulate what meaning of life is, something that we will try to explore here, and even more difficult to actually to identify what kind of life can be meaningful. What I would say is that, as a starting point, I would say that I do not believe that there's an objective meaning to life that would fit everybody, like a book that you can buy that would guide you. But I do leave the door open for the possibility of subjective meaning.
And can you tell us a little bit more about what that means? What would subjective meaning be?
Well, subjective meaning is something that, generally speaking, is something that comes from within. It does not depend on the external world, on the materialistics world, or the kind of things that you may have, the success that you may have. Although this obviously may correlate sometimes with a sense of meaning. But at the end of the day, it's about your approach, your understanding, your attitude towards your own life. Now, by saying this, I do not solve the problem of meaning of life because there can be all sorts of possible answers or candidates, right? One would argue that life is all about happiness and joy and pleasures. One would argue that meaning is actually something that we can achieve through suffers, through struggle, through challenges. One would consider this question to be meaningless because there's no meaning to life whatsoever. So the kind of possible the candidates for the meaning of life can be very different from one to the other. But the point here is that we should focus on the inside and not the outside to seek for the answer. We might not find it inside as well, but we're almost certainly not going to find it outside.
And so when you say finding it outside, do you mean, does that include a religious stance or finding meaning within a higher order being of some sort? Or is that what you mean by the outside meaning?
Well, religious definitely provide with a possible answer because the idea of religious is that there is a creator, there's a God, there's a designer, there's a purpose for all this, and we are part of this purpose. So everything, the fact that we're here, the fact that we're living our life, everything that happens to us is in this context of meaning. And once you consider this to be true because you believe in it, then you, in a certain way, solve the problem because whether you know what is the end goal of all this or not, you can be certain that there is one. And one may argue that this is the whole purpose of religion, right? To fulfill this human need for meaning. I personally do not believe in this, and as such, God and religion does not provide me with a sense of meaning.
And do you feel like we need to respect how others perceive meaning? Like, can we all coexist with different senses of meaning, or do we need to still keep working towards a meaning that we can all agree upon?
Well, I don't think that there's an objective answer to this. If there was, there would probably be by now someone who would put it on paper, would publish a book, and all we need to do is to go to the bookstore, buy a book, and just follow the guideline. Obviously, that is not the case, although there are many who attempt to suggest that that is the case, and they're actually selling us those kinds of books. But I do not think that there's an objective answer, and I think that that is one of the challenges, the main challenges, that there is no clear answer to this. What would give us a sense of meaning? And there are all sorts of obstacles to get there because life, we are thrown to this world without choosing, without knowing where we came from. And life is full of struggles, of pain, of disappointments, of suffer, alongside, of course, with joy, pleasures, and happiness. And at the end, we die after 70, 80, 90 years, which is a blink of an eye in the context of, of time and space. So this is really challenging. How can one consider his life as meaningful, knowing that everything is so temporary, seems to be so insignificant? 8 billion people around the world. I'm just one individual living in one city, one neighborhood, one house. It's everything seems to be so insignificant. So this is a true struggle. Yet I think that there are potential answers, subjective answers to this question.
So that's interesting. So would you say that there is a meaning to be found? Or is there really no meaning and we are creating it? Based on what you just said, perhaps you're suggesting, and please clarify if I've misunderstood, that as we age, we come across new struggles, we suffer, we live the highs and the lows. So perhaps the meaning in our life might change. So if we can argue that as our lives change, the meaning of our life might change, would that prove or support the idea that perhaps there is no inherent meaning, but rather something that we look for?
Yeah, I think that is a good point. Not only that there's no objective answer that fits everybody, even for us, the answer may change through time. As we are changing, we are not the same person as we were. You may ask yourself, what do you have in common with yourself when you were 6 or 10 years old? And you might discover very little, right? Even in terms of your own personality or psychology or wiring, psychological wiring. So we're changing. Life circumstances changing. The way we perceive our own life changes. The challenges, the things that we consider to be valuable, and of course, the meaning of life may change in accordance. And this as well strengthening the idea that there's no objective meaning to all. But I think a key, if we move a little bit forward to the possible positive answers to this, I think that one of the keys can be found in there were different articulations of this idea. One of them is Friedrich Nietzsche, who said, who has the why can bury anyhow, and the other way around. As long as you have the why, the reason, then you can live even a quality life, no matter what the circumstances are, even if the circumstances are very, very challenging. On the other hand, if you don't have the why, even if you have everything, you're privileged, you're a celebrity, you have money, you are known, you have respect from other people. If you don't have the internal why, then you would not, you are much less likely to reach a sense of meaning. So we can narrow the possible candidates for this answer by articulating or by identifying first that the question is, or the what we should aim for is the why. Why are we doing what we're doing? What is the purpose? Where are we trying to reach? What is the ultimate end? And let me ask you in this regard, what do you think? Do you agree? Do you think that there is meaning to life?
Yeah, just to build off of what you were just saying with regard to Nietzsche, as you know, Nietzsche is one of the most misunderstood, misquoted, misjudged philosophers that we know. And I certainly encourage everyone who's listening to take a careful look at what he really has to say. But I too am in the camp of Nietzsche in that there is no inherent meaning to our lives, but that it is our choice to create it. I think that's why he often gets sort of tied into a lot of the negative thoughts and negative actions and dangerous thoughts and dangerous actions that could be construed with, well, if there is no meaning, then nothing matters. Or if there is no meaning, then no actions that I take impact anybody else because there are no ethics, there are no emotions, there is no purpose. And so that's sort of the dangerous jump in logic that so many have taken and attributed to Nietzsche, I would say. And of course, I don't personally hold that viewpoint. I'm not looking for mass destruction. I don't believe that is where we are headed or where we should be headed. And neither did Nietzsche, by the way. Most people think of him as a pessimist, and he was no such thing. But I am in his camp in the sense that I don't think there is an inherent meaning that we need to build knowledge towards understanding or finding, but that it is incumbent upon us to discover that for ourselves towards the building of a happy, productive, ethical life. And so that's how I feel.
But how could one would say, how could you assume that there is meaning to life, considering again that life is so temporary and seems to be in the big scale of things so insignificant? In what possible way it could be meaningful? You know, in 100 years from now, we'll be gone. The people who knows us, unfortunately, will be gone. There's nothing's going to be left from us. In 500 years, nobody would remember that we've been here, and the Earth existed for 14 billion years, and it would continue to exist. So it seems strange, one may say, that you are considering life as one that has the potential for meaning. Where did this come from?
No, I think to clarify, I do not think that there is a meaning on any sort of cosmic scale. I do not think that my life has any meaning on any sort of cosmic scale, but so it becomes my choice within my lifetime to create meaning. And I actually think you bring up a very good point, which starts to get into another question that I wanted to discuss with you, which is the concept of our certain demise at some stage, God will, or, hopefully many years from now, does that help shape or inform how we establish our meaning today? So I happen to believe that it does, and I think there are many philosophers that would support that as well. I think that if we didn't die, I think that if there was no end to our existence, if we were truly part of the permanent cosmic order, that there would be no need to have a spouse to be faithful to. There would be no need to have friends because you could make that friend in 100 years from now. There would be no need to be ethical because you go to jail, you come out, you'll live forever, and it wouldn't matter. So I think that actually death, in a sense, helps create sort of a mental, emotional parameters of sorts that help us with a bit of a framework for our own life, knowing that at some stage this will all be over. And so while we're here, we need to create some meaning for ourselves, that there is nothing larger that to be found. And as you said, subjectively, people find that in a million different places, from religion to to humanism to Epicureanism, whatever the case is. But I actually think
But why
death.
why address it as meaning instead of, because I agree with everything you said about death, and we can hardly imagine how would our life look if we were eternal.
Mm,
But maybe one could conclude from this that we're just using the wrong term. If life is very limited and there's no objective possible meaning because there's no real significance to our lives, then the most that we can hope for is to live a good life, which basically equal to be as much happy, to enjoy as much pleasures, uh, sorry, as possible.
mm.
That's what life is. Not because this is the best kind of life that we could imagine, or we could imagine a more valuable life, but giving life as it is, this is what we should aim for.
Yeah, I mean, I think I take it back to where we sort of initially started, which is that I think humans, and this could be a cultural thing that we experience. A lot of our, at least the place that I come from, that you come from, a lot of times it's our culture is tied up with religion, and even if we ourselves are not religious, I think there is an undercurrent. Again, whether it's cultural or whether it's a wiring that we have as humans to need to explain things because there is just so much unknown that we need to explain why we're here, where we came from, what happens to us when we're gone. Obviously, religion explains a lot of these things, but there is a certain discomfort that you need to be able to sit with in order to say, I don't need to create meaning. I just need to live a good life. And I think that you can do that. And if you're comfortable with that, that's great. I think a lot of people can't. I think that feels very scary to a lot of people.
I would take it further, and I would say nobody can. I believe that just living a life of joy and pleasures would not bring you to a meaningful life.
Hmm.
Not because I say so, philosophers say so, or the priests say so, but because the way we are structured, the way we are built, as humans. It's not enough for us to enjoy pleasures and have fun. And there are so many testimonies to this because there are some people who are privileged enough to live a kind of life that they can enjoy everything they want, right, in terms of materialistic and so on. And yet they are far from being happy, or sorry, far from being happy slash have a sense of meaning. Some of them even end their life because they're so miserable. So I think that the paradox here is that we get a sense of meaning not through pleasures, which are very short while very often, and they don't carry the true value of what we truly need, but through actually challenges and tasks that we put to ourselves, and depending on our ability to actually to achieve the things that we believe we put for ourselves as purposes, we are feeling this sense of meaning. And if I needed to put one word regarding this, is I would say it's about the passion. If you have the passion for a certain thing that you're aiming for, then you would feel a sense of meaning regardless of what is required on the way to get there. If you are training yourself for a marathon because you consider this to be, the ultimate goal, and once you achieve that, you prove yourself that you succeed in exceeding your own limitations, it's human, physical, mental, and so on. The process would be extremely difficult, but yet it would actually provide you with meaning. One of the old examples for this is the myth of Sisyphus. You know, Sisyphus in Greek myth, he was punished by the gods to roll this rock up the hill, never achieving the end, just to observe the rock falling down so that he can come down and roll it again and again and again for eternity. Something that seems to be completely meaningless. Yet, if we just make a slight switch in this story and we ask ourselves how we would consider Sisyphus if he had the passion, the internal subjective passion to push rocks. If we do that, we immediately recognize that Sisyphus not might be even happy or satisfied or have a sense of meaning. So
So I would push back on that a little bit. To use the example of the marathon, I would support that that could be a goal, but I think there's a distinction to be made between a goal for which you suffer, for which you sacrifice, and a meaning. To me, a meaning would be something that is a bit of a connective tissue within your life through ups and downs. So I would wonder that if it was something that was temporary, like the accomplishment of athletic feat of some sort, once that is complete, surely you would feel satisfaction. But then what? Do you have to redefine what your meaning of life is? It seems like a very big term for sort of a short term goal, if you will. So what do you think about that?
I think, yes, you're right, definitely. And you asked if your meaning of life or purpose of life changes through time, and I definitely think so. So it's not just one definite purpose that you're aiming for from at the age of 15 until you die. Some maybe have like this kind of ultimate goal that they're aiming for, and they're living their whole life in accordance with. But very often it will change. So you're right. The one who runs marathon may feel this meaning and purpose in the process, but once he's done with the marathon, it's over and he needs to find another purpose. But it is possible, it is available to find another passion. It's not easy, and not all people can find this inside themselves. But if you do, then you can change the destination, like a GPS, right? You may have different destinations, but you're moving forward to a certain direction. As long as you're on that status, then you are okay. The worst thing that can happen, and we see this all over us, that people live their life just as a kind of maintenance, and they don't have any GPS. They don't. If you stop people in the street and you ask them, where are you aiming for, they will not be able to provide you with an answer. They don't know, right? Which is very strange. If an alien came from out of space, you would find this very surprising, because if you look outside of the window and you see people driving, you take it for granted that they have a certain destination. Otherwise, they wouldn't drive. They don't just take right turn and left turn. Yet we humans, the way we live our lives is very much like that. We don't have a destination.
Now, how would you fit the idea of service or giving to others in terms of meaning? I think a lot of people would find or believe that giving to others through service, or even in just the day-to-day altruism, and altruism could be a subject we discuss at another time, whether that even exists, but how would you say that that fits in? Because certainly when you're giving to others, you aren't objectively giving to yourself, but I know many would argue that that in fact provides you one with a tremendous amount of meaning, perhaps more so than anything you could actually do for yourself directly.
Well, I think that's a very strong point. And, in ethics, philosophy of morality, that is one of the arguments that, because you need, when you are trying to justify morality, why should I sacrifice something for someone else, right? Why should I bother? Why should I go outside of the car when it's minus 20 outside to help someone that I don't even know and there's no seems to be any reward for it? And the argument may be that, again, going back to human nature, we are programmed in such a way that we have this need for meaning, for purpose, and this need, which is crucial for us to live a flourishing life, can be uh, uh, um, provided in different ways. One of them, maybe a major one of them, is ethics morality. And the idea here is that the more you are willing to go outside of your books, your own books, your own interests, and your own incentives, then you, again, because of the way you are built, you would get this sense, this feeling of meaning. So yes, it is true. If you leave your car, you stop your car at minus 20, you go outside to help this homeless that you just, so nobody would know about this. You would not be rewarded, but something inside you, the inside mechanism inside you would reward you in a sense of a meaning, of purpose, of significance. And I think that this is something that many people can correlate with if they experience this. Once you do things, when you go outside of your way and you sacrifice something from yourself just for the sake of let's say the virtue, the moral aspect of it, not because you are getting any insight, any reward from it, then you feel it. You feel it. We're discussing God in religions very often. The idea of God is that there's, like a big, like the ultimate father. He's watching us, supervises us, punishing us, rewarding us. But in truth, if God truly cared about ethics, he would do a much more efficient thing. And that is, he would plug this mechanism inside us. So he doesn't need to bother with this. As long as we're living a moral life, we are rewarded by this internal feeling, right, that we are discussing. And when you're not, you suffer. In that sense, the head of an organized crime in South America, for example, seems to be very happy because he has having everything. But in truth, because of the way he's built and this internal mechanism, he's not truly is not experiencing the sense of meaning because he doesn't provide his internal needs with this moral aspect, which is crucial for a meaningful life.
Okay, so I feel like you've talked a little bit about how meaning is a bit tied up with the idea of purpose and having, and that can change throughout your life, whether that's the marathon or something that's time specific. But now you've also just introduced the idea that there needs to be, or there could be something intrinsic, like a call to service or a call for morality. So, how would you reconcile those two in terms of the larger idea of meaning? Is it a combination of both the things that change throughout our lives, the individual steps that as we have children, that's a new level of meaning, etc., or as well as sort of layered onto something that is intrinsic within us, or is one more important than the other?
I think that's a tricky one because morality is about getting outside of your own box for others. So it's a social thing. Now, the issue here is that very often the idea that meaning can be reached through our relationships and socializing can actually very often lead to the opposite. Because what happens in real life is that many people misinterpret this idea of socializing and dependence of the outside, and they live their lives in accordance to other expectations. They tend to please others, sometimes unnecessarily by sacrificing themselves. And this is the opposite way or the opposite direction from reaching meaning, because the meaning again comes from the inside. And if you live your life in accordance to some external manuals or external expectations, when you follow certain norms that you don't necessarily agree with from inside you, you will feel the dissonance inside you. And this is probably one of the worst enemies of meaning. When you
Yeah. And how do we help ourselves and our peers and our children tackle this? I mean, we're all of the things that we're talking about on this have related to critical thinking, right? We're encouraging each other to think more critically about subjects, pushing back on ideas, and we're encouraging others to do the same. But how do we really help people do this? Because I hear what you're saying, but of course, so many would argue, certainly those with more of a religious bent, that you really can't create meaning. It's either too dangerous or too inconsistent to assign meaning based on your subjective feelings about the world and where you are. That there needs to be something larger to guide and to advise and to ensure that we do live a moral life that we can pass on and feel safe with. So, how are we supposed to encourage people to think critically without creating chaos?
Well, I think if you have such a belief in a God and a purpose and objective purpose, then life is easier in that sense, right? But I personally don't believe that believing is something that you can choose, right? You can pretend to believe, you can live your life as if you're a believer, but to be a truly believer, authentically believe this, you need to be convinced yourself, and whether you are or not, it's not necessarily depends on what you want, right?
Hmm.
But if you get there, then that is a possibility. That is one direction. For the others, and in the context of children, I would, from my point of view, I would argue that the things that we were emphasizing here are maybe the key things, right? When we educate our children, to put more focus on the internal voice, to put more focus on what you truly passion, what you truly consider to be as things that matters for you, that achieving them would make you feel as if you extended your limitations in some way. So it's the inside. To be aware of the dangers of being part of social community where you are very often maybe led to distance yourself from this internal voice. And that authenticity comes with a heavy price, right? Society doesn't always reward authenticity. For being authentic, you need to have a spine. You need to be willing to stand in front of criticism and to stand in front of all sorts of sanctions, socials and others. So there's a price for it, but if you truly believe that this is the only way to live a meaningful life or a necessary condition, then you would advocate for this for your children as well. Now, at the end of the day, the exact way that they would implement those strategic paths or ways depends on them, depends on their life circumstances, depends on their personality. But as the North Star, these are kind of directions that I would be supportive of.
Well, that's interesting. And now I would love to take that and just pick a little bit further about how you know that that is true. How do you know that a life of experience, of struggle, of suffering leads to meaning? Because certainly for those who don't regularly experience suffering, not to say that you do, but for those that don't or haven't come across it, is that to say that they have a meaningless life, or that they have sort of misrepresented to themselves what meaning really is? How do you know that that is true?
Well, first, one correction. I do not think that suffering is equal to meaning, and you need to suffer to have meaning. I argue that meaning comes from identifying your passion and working towards it. And working towards it involved sometimes, very often, maybe always, with some amount of sacrifice, some pain, some suffer, right? Because you're struggling, right? You need to resist your own temptation to, I don't know, to just to go to have a fancy dinner, right? Instead of this, you work hard for something. In that sense, I would never argue that suffer in itself is a purpose for meaning. And as for your other question, how do I know that it is true? Obviously, this whole conversation, as we started, is not about objectivity. It's not about objective answers because I don't believe we have access to such. It's about subjective answers. And I think that the answer is, or the evidence to support what I'm saying, at least from what my perspective, my experience, is self-evidence. I experienced this in my life. And from observing other people, other lives, I think that this is also true for most people. That if you are just living your life, for as many pleasures and satisfactions, physical satisfactions with others, yeah, you would join the benefit of this. What you would not feel the significant purpose of life. Well, if you're focusing on the things that I was describing, you would feel it. Now, the issue with meaning is that we find it very hard to identify what it is and or how we can get there. But we can feel when we experience it and when we don't. When we do, we flourish. When we don't, we suffer. So you don't need anyone else to tell you whether you're in the right direction or not. You just feel it from the inside. If you wake up in the morning without motivation to get out of bed because you don't find any purpose or justification to do anything, you suffer. And you suffer because of emptiness, which is exactly the opposite of meaning. If you get up of bed full of energy and vitality, you got to where you need to be, right? So you don't need anyone to give you a V or to give you A plus for your answer or your towards regarding meaning because it is self evidence. So that is what I would argue. And obviously, if someone doesn't experience it the same way, then everything that we're saying here is not relevant for his subjective mechanism.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting because now we've talked about suffering in two different ways, right? The suffering that is in the process of doing good and something productive, and the suffering that I think you used the word empty or something like that. But I would
Emptiness.
argue that there are many times and many individuals who go through suffering, whether it's addiction or something where you don't realize that the meaning is in the experience that you are in the middle of, and that it's only upon reflection that you see what the purpose is, that the meaning is in helping others battle addiction, or it's in whatever it is. But sometimes in the suffering you can't see that it isn't empty. It might feel empty to you or to your family, but perhaps in time. And I think that's one of the most important parts of critical thinking in general, which is the essential nature of self-interrogation. So whether we are in a high point and we're getting out of bed singing, as you suggest, or whether we're at the lowest point of our lives, to be able to pause in our minds and think again about why we think what we think, and why we're here, and what contributed to the place that we're in, and how those experiences and thoughts have led us to our core belief set. I think that is sort of the heart of critical thinking, and it's essential that we all sort of take stock of that thought process as we move through our lives, because it's in that reflection, I think, we can gain a lot of the learnings about our authenticity, or the change, the evolution of how we define meaning for ourselves.
It all starts with self-reflection. It all starts with there, and one who gives up or do not consider this to be an important part of his life. He doesn't put effort in the self-reflection to try to understand himself, to try to understand the reality around him, to try to figure out and to analyze his own experiences and the way that they impact himself and his sense of meaning, will obviously end up with much less likelihood to reach this.
Yeah.
Critical thinking is crucial. Also, another point in this regard is that we are bombed with suggested destinations, right? When we look at the commercials, when we go to the mall, when we look around the social media, we are all, we are bombed with all different kinds of ideas or signals that aim to suggest that if you only do this, you will get the sense of meaning, you'll be happy. If you'll only do this, and many of them are just misleading. So without critical thinking, we would just be, we would go with the stream.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Dotan. That's a great way to end. Thank you to you, and thank you to everyone who's watching. If you like this video, please like it below. Drop us a comment. Thanks for those who have commented before, and please feel free to share this with friends and let us know if anyone has any suggestions for future episodes. So thanks, Dotan. I hope you have a very meaningful day.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you.